Lauren, Evelyn and Annalisa will present on the work of ACAN so far, their strategies for building a coalition for change, and then they will invite you to take part in a small group exercise at the end to help you identify ways in which you can have your practice work more sustainably. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lauren and I'm one of the coordinators at Architects Climate Action Network. ACAN is a voluntary network of individuals within architecture and related professions taking action to transform our industry in the face of the climate and ecological emergency. We see this transformation as a matter of urgency. The increasing number of devastating climate events we see in the news are a result of just 1 degree of warming. The well-referenced IPCC report issued in 2018 clearly outlined what the impacts of 1.5 degrees of warming would look like. Inaction is not an option. ACAN was formed in April 2019 within the context of the global climate movement. A small group of us began trying to address the lack of activism within architecture. We needed an organisation or a network to be everything that wasn't happening in the industry. Our mission is to mobilise a new movement of professional activists by opening a supportive and inclusive organisation. ACAN empowers individuals to proactively seek change and facilitates collective effort through a shared platform built on collaboration. Our manifesto has 3 overarching aims. 1, to decarbonise the industry. 2, for ecological regeneration. And 3, cultural transformation. ACAN's structure is largely based on a network of decentralised thematic and working groups. There is a core coordination team of approximately 20 coordinators who help the smooth running of these groups and facilitate internal communication. The structure of ACAN is always evolving. We had a vision for how we could work autonomously in order to make rapid decisions and respond quickly to the climate emergency. A lot of these decisions regarding ACAN's core structures have happened quite organically, but we have learnt and borrowed from other organisations, for example, Extinction Rebellion's principles on facilitation for the running of meetings, consensus decision-making. Our meetings take different formats, from whole group discussions such as open meetings or assemblies to smaller, more focused campaign discussions. The open meetings often have guest speakers and typically happen once a month, whilst thematic groups happen weekly with continuous communication via WhatsApp. I'm now going to pass over to Eve, who's going to run you through the types of actions that ACAN does.
Thank you for the introduction, Lauren. My name's Eve, and today I'll be presenting the different types of actions that we undertake as a group to create change. Some of these actions form part of a campaign, and at the end of this, I will go through an example of one of our recent campaigns. So the first action is movement building. So movement building is quite important because it helps us gain momentum as a group and it brings people and expertise into our group. We advocate for professional activism within the workplace as well as activism outside of work. And to me, this has been quite important to me as an Australian who's moved over to London. I didn't have that many friends within architecture other than the people I worked with. So joining ACAN was a great way for me to network and meet like-minded individuals. Our second action is political campaigning and lobbying. As a group, we've realised that we actually have immense power and we're using our collective agency to campaign and lobby for change. In order to create truly systemic change, we need to address the standards and regulations that may not be appropriate in this climate crisis. This image shows where we sit in the network of organisations within London and who we need to influence and collaborate with in order to reach our campaign goals. The next action is direct action. Severity and the urgency of the climate crisis might mean that current actions may not be enough. Protest movements and direct actions has paved way for major changes in the past, and the current protests are a proof of that. Currently, we undertake research, more commonly through data collection, and these are focused and relevant to the campaigns that we're currently running. Our capacity to research might be a bit limited right now because of the nature of our voluntary organisation, but at the moment we're looking at opportunities to leverage off some of the work done by other organisations. Knowledge sharing is quite important to our organisation as it connects and leverages off some of the work that other people have done. This is both within ACAN as well as other groups such as AED, AD and LETI. During COVID, knowledge sharing has looked a little different. We've been trying to hold as many speaker events as we can and reaching an audience outside of London. And on top of this, to share what we've learned, we do publish some of our recordings on YouTube and share some of the resources through emails afterwards. Lastly, public engagement is something that we also do. The aim of this is to change the behaviour of the general public. This isn't always serious. So one of our campaigns is the Architects Admit campaign. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek attempt to reflect on the impact of our own actions. This was a physical booth that was set up for the Future Build Expo, but now it's gone virtual because of the COVID crisis. So now looking at an example of one of our recent campaigns, which is the Save Safe Structural Timber campaign. So the context is that after the Grenfell tragedy, the government has proposed to ban combustible materials in and on the external walls of certain buildings. But this ban actually extended to prevent the use of safe structural timber in construction. The government held a consultation on the proposed changes, inviting the public to give their response and feedback. So our aim for the campaign was to provide a detailed response to empower ACAN and members of the public to respond to this consultation. So why was this issue important to us? So although we support the ban on combustible materials, we thought the ban went too far and it had an unnecessary impact on using timber as a primary structure. Timber is a very low embodied carbon material, so this building material is necessary for us to continue to build low carbon buildings. And what we're proposing instead is for a science-based approach using the relevant standards as the basis for fire safety compliance. We achieved this through 4 months of campaigning, involving 12 active campaign members and 3 campaign coordinators. And this was developed as part of the embodied carbon group in ACAN. The output of this is ACAN's full response to the consultation, which was 20 pages, ACAN's guide to responding, which was a bullet point summary for those who wanted to respond, and a draft letter for your MPs for individuals who wanted to complete this and send, and also graphics with key messaging that you saw on the previous slides. Our challenge was that we had to respond to some contrary views, not just within ACAN, but within the industry. And in order to take this into account, we acknowledged that campaigns are not static, and we allowed for this feedback to be taken on board, and our response was then reworded prior to the final submission. And one of the lessons that we learnt on this campaign was that we had to maintain a comfortable team environment for people to talk about their own personal conflicts when needed. The result of this campaign was that we reached over 200 responses, and we're currently waiting for the government to release their response to this. So now I'll hand over to Annalisa.
So hi, I'm Annalisa, and I'm going to talk about some of the strategies for making change and some of our learnings from ACAN. Following this, we'll have a short breakout session to put into practice the planning strategies discussed, namely critical paths and power mapping. So Eva's presented the many ways we are going about making change and some of the successes we have had to date. Whilst we have many working groups developing ideas and potential campaigns, the breadth of topics and the high level of participation can lead to inaction if it's not well managed. And we risk losing the momentum and the energy of members who are volunteering their time. No progress may lead to frustration. So a key aspect is organisation and decision making. Lauren's also touched that we are a self-organising system with working groups, and each working group writes their own mandates. This is an ongoing activity. Essentially, the mandate is a scope that defines what the group is supposed to get on with, And the ideal is to have every working group activity covered by a role and its mandates. This gives working groups autonomy to do whatever they want. It prevents duplication of work, as no one outside the group is allowed to do the work that you're mandated to do. And it gives responsibility. There's an expectation that you will actually do the work connected to the mandate, and that you have the skill set needed to fulfill your mandate well. The appropriate decision-making process varies on the group size. It may be that you delegate decision-making to a role within the group, or that you use an integrative process, where suggestions from the group are integrated into any proposal until there is no grounds for objections left. So working groups must determine if a campaign is what's necessary to achieve their aims. For some working groups, knowledge share is the best route. Education is a broadening exercise that improves understanding and reveals layers of complexity. Campaigning, on the other hand, maximizes motivation as opposed to knowledge. It is used for setting up and sustaining processes that are not business as usual. Campaigns don't win all at once. Breaking down the steps is a key skill for successful strategizing. So too is communicating one thing at a time with a simple call to action. Effective motivation needs simplicity in message and purpose. The campaign goal is the overarching vision or the big picture change that you're aiming for. For example, a rapid transition from coal to renewable energy. Cutting the issue is about taking the big picture problem and making it specific, an immediate and reliable issue that you can mobilize the community around. In 2018, in a similar consultation to the structural timber campaign, the number of total respondents was only 2. In ACAN, our goal was to increase the number of respondents to as many people as possible to show that this is an issue that is important within the industry. A power analysis helps to think about forces affecting the movement, those who want the change and those who don't, including political, economic, and cultural factors. It can help decide where to focus energy during the campaign and to anticipate obstacles. Identifying the organizations or individuals that hold power in terms of delivering the desired outcomes is useful in determining where the campaign might affect the greatest influence. For the timber campaign, the team consulted with structural engineers, architects that specialize with timber construction, and timber trade representatives. A log was kept to keep track of allies, press articles, quotes, and engagements. This collaboration delayed the launch of the campaign, but we felt that this input was invaluable in providing the campaign with credibility. The critical path is a thread that runs through that complex whole picture. It has to be a series of steps where one leads to the next. Each stepping stone is an objective in itself, building on one another until your campaign objective is realized. You should not move on from a step until it's achieved. Work out who your target audience is for each step and look at it from their point of view. For example, you may need a critical level of awareness or a buy-in from a certain number of decision makers. This critical path should be visited regularly as things change. A key critical path for the timber campaign was extending the deadline of the consultation period to maximize responses. In light of the COVID crisis, an extension of 6 weeks was granted. So each stepping stone in the critical path is an outcome, something that is required to happen to move on. You can use SMART analysis to reframe outcomes as objectives that you can then develop as a strategy. Concrete and achievable objectives help to channel the group efforts. Finally, the tactics are the actions that are used to achieve your goals and objectives. The strategy is a sequencing of these in a logical and high-impact way. Thanks.
So hi, I'm now here live. Sorry, that was a pre-recorded message previously. True to ACAN's participatory format, we will now be running some groups breakout rooms, which you'll automatically be placed into. Once you're in the breakout room, do a quick check-in, introduce yourself and the size of the practice you work in, nominate one note taker and one facilitator. Within ACAN, we always encourage that everyone's voice is heard. Some discussion etiquette. Put up one hand if you have an idea to share. The facilitator should keep track of the speaking order. If you have a direct point, you can request to step in immediately by putting up 2 fingers. A temperature check is a good way to reach a decision as a group. So wave 2 hands up to show agreement and wave 2 hands down to show disagreement. You should have received a strategies for change worksheet. Within your groups, we'd like you to focus on outcomes that could help you, your own organisation practice more sustainably, and to think about how you might implement these. For example, you might wish to reduce your office's energy consumption. Discuss your ideas and plot your outcomes on the matrix, based on how much impact they would have and how easy they are to achieve. As a group, use this analysis to choose one outcome where you might focus your energy. So you'll have 10 minutes in the breakout room. When we return to the main session, we will ask the note taker from some of the groups to give a summary of their identified outcome. So I think we can now go into the breakout room, so 10 minutes. Well, welcome back. Can I ask note takers to use the raise hand icon, and we'll choose 3 or so to give a quick summary of the discussions and the outcomes that you identified within your groups. So Sophie, I don't know if Steve can unmute Sophie.
Hello. We didn't get through everything on the sheet, but key points that we talked about on how to organise practice more sustainably were working from home, which we thought would have a high impact. That we already know that it has a high impact because of COVID and the lockdown. But we thought that was sort of somewhere between easy and difficult, because whilst it's easy to implement now because everybody's already doing it, mentally it's quite difficult, and managing that mental health aspect of it. And then the other key thing that we spoke about was sustainable tech and spec. So an example that we had for that was modular construction, and convincing clients to go with those sustainable tech and specs would have a high impact, but it is more difficult.
I absolutely agree. I think it's a conversation that we're having within ACAN, our own offices as well, is, you know, there's how you change the operations and what you're doing, and then how you change the projects that you're working on, and kind of the buy-in from the client. So those are exactly the 2 things that we're grappling with as well.
Great.
So thank you, Sophie. Should we ask Laura as well if she wants to share some of the key outcome that was discussed in your group?
Hi. Just so following on from the previous other group, I think we were looking at some of the current, if you like, easy wins, which might seem more prevalent because people have been adapting in the most recent months, like things like people doing a lot of digital markups for project work, whereas previously it was much more customary to print things out and do manual markups. So you're kind of a natural reduction of waste through that. Some of the kind of typical office-based activities we're maybe not doing at the moment, and I guess that's kind of given people the idea that, you know, things can be done in a different way, including like recycling, reduction of waste. Some of the more difficult things that, again, linking in with kind of the current scenario, maybe return to work anxieties, are things like welfare facility provision and space allowances for that. Anything that, you know, will kind of improve people's working environment and also access to work, like secure cycle storage and that sort of thing. But maybe an office doesn't have that amenity at the moment, or, you know, it's not possible to build in larger like shower spaces and that sort of thing, or even provision in the first place. So there was kind of, it kind of look at the sliding scale of that. But I think the positive thing is there's quite a few things that can naturally, with the remote working, kind of add into a more sustainable working approach. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. I agree, like in my office, we've had some of these discussions prior to lockdown and the pandemic happening. And it's quite interesting how that has suddenly just completely shifted. All of the carbon calculations we were doing is just completely different framework that we're working in now. So very much agree. And then finally we have Akram, who has his hand up. Would you like to also share the discussed outcomes?
Hi. Yeah, we've raised obviously most of the key concerns that everybody else raised, which is mainly reduce the unnecessary traveling and remote working. But I think two items of the that we've discussed, and we thought this would be more related to us, to our profession as architects, because everything else can be applied for, an accountancy or any other office. But the two things that we have to, or we can do from our profession, is reduce the construction waste and reuse of buildings. So I think this, by carefully specifying the materials that we're putting in each project, and also try also to offer the client with alternative solution to a new building, how to reuse the existing one without creating so much waste. I think that would be, although it's very difficult, but it would have a high impact.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you're touching exactly on that. These are the kind of the high impact things about the projects that we're designing and the work we're actually doing, the buildings that we are going to be constructing. And those are going to be the big wins, but they take time and much more buy-in to get there. I think we have another hand up. I can take a final one if Pradam wants to contribute.
Hiya. One of the sort of carrying on from Akram's point there about reusing buildings, our conversations, one of them was about materials, and as designers we've probably got a lot of influence, I think, in the industry and on what products to choose, and it feels like we've got a great responsibility and an opportunity to encourage the better ecological or more sustainable materials, so whether that's recycled or repurposing other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the great opportunities Hello?
Oh, pardon. Yeah, I think your audio dropped out. Do you want to just repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. We were talking about sort of materials and one of the opportunities that we could do. So picking sustainable materials and working with creating good relationships with suppliers and encouraging them. And I think that's one of the great opportunities we have as architects, to push people to try and innovate as much as possible. But we also realize that it's tricky because not every supplier is willing to step up to do the right tests, etc.
Well, this is where we have collective agency in the industry, because the more that we are pushing from the demand side onto the supply chain, asking for, we want to have material passports, for example, to encourage greater circularity of the materials we're using, or to, basically to encourage and influence what is available. I think we need to be constantly asking the suppliers, what the recycled content is of their materials, for example, and having these conversations with clients. So I think that was a very good point. I think we have one quick more minute if Joan also wants to share.
Yeah, no problem. I think the materials one was one that we had on our list of high impact but also difficult, because I think there would also need to be someone in the office kind of keeping up to date on materials and ensuring that it's constantly researched, to have that kind of catalogue in the office as well. So that's another point. And then we also talked about maybe one high impact but quite easy one is having sustainability reviews within the office, in order, just like you would have a design review or a technical review. So that you can share knowledge and kind of open up the conversation more.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we kind of asked you to look at was outcomes, and the next step would be mapping a critical path, forming these outcomes into an objective and then looking at how you would achieve those. I thought I'd just quickly share an experience within my own studio where, amongst other things, I thought it was necessary to address the impact of work-related travel, for example, limiting any but necessary flights. And as such, I wrote a best practice studio protocol about travel. So I required buy-in from my directors and first approached those who I know are most aligned with my position and presented the business case for limiting our travel. So saying that a consistent message that aligns with the studio's ethos and the vision statement gives strength of communication through strengthening communication through action. By giving a talk over video call, for example, instead of going somewhere in person, or arriving by train to international events. So I had to request time to research and produce this document. I presented the issue to give awareness amongst the wider team as why we were doing this, and then briefed studio managers on how to implement this best practice. So this protocol will be reviewed and needs to be amended, as we've spoken about, our circumstances are constantly changing. So I hope that we've given you some resources to reframe desired outcomes as objectives. And we really encourage that you consider how to implement these within your own practice. So think about what tactics are needed to achieve each of the smaller changes that will form your critical path. And then all there is left to do is to go and do it. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll hand over back to Anne.